What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is LazyDaze Tubby and I'm back at it again on the LazyDaze channel doing some solo reaction for you guys today, and it is some more Kings and Generals content for you, and it is their series The First Crusade, and it's their episode Biggest Battle of the First Crusade, the Battle of Antioch. I'm really looking forward to finding out what they've got in store for me today. I'm really enjoying this series. It's just taking me a bit of time to get to it because we've got so much on the go at the moment, so there's a lot more to come to the channel. Expect to see some new and interesting videos within the next few months. If you guys are looking forward to this, before that, if you haven't already, head over to Kings and Generals page. The link's going to be in the description box down below. If you guys are looking forward to this reaction and on future reactions, then like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But I am going to jump straight into this one.
In our last episode on the First Crusade, the Crusader army besieged Antioch on its way to Jerusalem and managed to repel two separate relief forces from Damascus and Aleppo, while maintaining the siege for months. Starvation, cold, desertion, and disease tested the religious convictions of the expedition, but in this episode, they'll face their most difficult and bloody trial yet. The year was 1098, and the Latins were about to change history in more ways than one.
Interesting.
To think about alt history for a second, though, there's something that could have easily maybe invite them to use. It's subscription. For free. So, hurry up and relax already. Against all odds, Bohemond and his 700 managed to repel a force of 10,000 with a combination of shock tactics, bravery, and insanity. An audacious move that not only saved the campaign, but provided essential food and supplies. Back at the camp, the Crusaders held out against another sally attempt from the garrison. Winter subsided, and seeing the Norman knights returning lifted the spirits of the besiegers, who once again believed that God was on their side. This triumphal march from the Battle of the Iron Bridge was also witnessed by an unlikely emissary at the camp. Indeed, representatives of the Fatimid Caliphate had arrived at the camp on the day of the battle, responding to the letters the Crusaders wrote earlier after Alexios suggested it, outlining the political disarray in the Muslim world. Despite the religious fervor of the hosts, the guests were shown great hospitality, receiving gifts from the recently plundered camp. Peter the Hermit was chosen to negotiate, but it soon became clear that the Egyptians believed that this army was essentially a Byzantine force. The emissaries knew that those who took the cross and went on a mission answering the call made by Alexios were paid generously by him, and all swore an oath to return any former Byzantine city to him. Over half of the initial force had already lost their lives on this journey, and over 100 strategic locations were handed over to the Romans, or were temporarily held in the case of Baldwin, who had not yet made his county of Edessa official.
He was just holding it at this point in time.
Continued to be the crucial lifeline that supported the crusade, but Tatikius had left, and there was no Byzantine representative to deal with the Fatimids, so why would they deal with these mercenaries? The envoys stayed in the camp for over a month before returning to Cairo with a few Franks. Both sides agreed to neutrality, which prevented a potential blockade from the only powerful Muslim navy in the region.
Okay.
The coming of March signaled the end of the hardest phase of the campaign so far. Many were slain, others died from cold and disease, the poor died from hunger.
The issues of siege warfare, man.
Those who couldn't endure the horrors of siege warfare deserted, and the women were exiled. However, those who remained were some of the most hardened, committed, and toughest warriors in history, with exceptional training and discipline. Looking back on this period, Anselm of Ribemont, a knight who had lived through the Antiochian winter, wrote, "Growing stronger and stronger, therefore, from that day our men took counsel with renewed courage."
Okay.
On the 4th of March, an English fleet arrived at St. Simeon carrying supplies, tools, and craftsmen, resources that would not just extend, but end the siege. Up until this point, the garrison was constantly in contact with the outside world, trading information and resources through its southern gates. To secure the heavy supplies from the relatively distant port, the two most powerful princes, Bohemond and Raymond, were chosen to go on this escort mission, accompanied by 60 knights and 500 infantry. Once again, the all-seeing citadel observed these movements, and Yegisian had his mounted archers harass the Crusader camp, while laying an ambush close to the bridge gate. The return journey from the port took 3 days, and once the convoy was spotted, the trap was sprung. On the 7th of March, the Seljuks screamed and galloped at a vulnerable gap in the infantry line. To quote the chronicler, "The Turks began to gnash their teeth and chatter and howl with very loud cries, wheeling around our men, throwing darts and loosing arrows, wounding and slaughtering them most brutally. Their attack was so fierce that our men began to flee over the nearest mountain or wherever there was path. Those who could get away quickly escaped alive, and those who could not were killed."
The trap worked.
The majority of the infantry was quickly broken, yet only 2 knights were lost, pointing to the lack of cohesion in the Crusader ranks.
That's good.
Commanding the rearguard, Bohemond rushed in with reinforcements, while Godfrey of Bouillon rallied his troops from the camp and joined the fray. An intense battle ensued before the walls of Antioch, which only intensified as Yagisian poured in more troops from the garrison. After months of stare-downs and harassment, the 2 sides finally met in the open field. The garrison was pushed back towards the bridge gate as panic overwhelmed the Muslim forces. Our primary source wrote, "Those who did not succeed in crossing the bridge alive because of the great press of men and horses suffered their everlasting death with the devil and his imps. For we
Imagine just fighting to get off of this bridge.
Came after them,
fighting
driving
for your life.
them into the river or throwing them down, so that the water of that swift stream seemed to be running red with the blood of Turks. And if by chance any of them tried to climb up the pillars of the bridge or to reach the bank by swimming, he was stricken by our men who were standing all along the river bank." Imagine that was
you.
played his hand, knowing he had the advantages of intelligence, mobility, and the element of surprise. Had his ambush succeeded, the Crusaders would have lost their leaders, precious supplies, and the initiative from the recent victory. Multiple eyewitnesses who later wrote about this engagement reported that both sides lost 1,500 men each, a number which reduced the enemy garrison substantially. The Christian clergy held services commemorating those who had lost their lives, while the survivors flaunted their newly gained Arabian horses and silk clothes. At dawn, the Muslims from Antioch briefly left the city so they could bury their dead in a nearby abandoned mosque, alongside cloaks, coins, bows, and arrows. Once again, contemporary sources report, "When our men heard this, they came in haste to that devil's chapel and ordered the bodies to be dug up and the tombs destroyed, and the dead men dragged out of their graves. They threw all the corpses into a pit and cut off their heads and brought them to our tents so that they could count the number exactly, except for those that they loaded onto 4 horses belonging to the ambassadors of the Emir of Cairo."
Wow. Okay.
On the 10th of March, work began on a new fort, built on top of the abandoned mosque itself, which was renamed La Marie, or Blessed Mary. This was no fortress, but it provided cover against arrow fire and choked the crucial bridge gate under the command of Raymond. By the end of the month, the garrison
Raymond was paid for the construction in the hopes of it to be the first. Okay, I see.
Launched a surprise attack on the fort, testing its strength, and nearly succeeded. However, heavy rain poured down, slowing them long enough for reinforcements to arrive and push them back. Another divine sign that lifted the spirits of one side and tested the resolve of the other. In April, the noose tightened after Tancred was appointed and paid to secure an abandoned monastery near the St. George Gate, and within days, his party managed to capture a Syrian and Armenian trade caravan, taking grain, wine, and oil, which now fed the Crusaders instead of the city. While not totally encircled, the city now received limited supplies from the hard-to-reach Iron Gate as tensions grew. Muslim sallies stopped, allowing the foraging to continue, while shipments from the Empire became far more frequent. Then, suddenly, the Crusaders received lavish gifts of horses and weapons, courtesy of the new ruler of Edessa, Baldwin of Bouillon.
Oh, Baldwin helped him out.
During this period, emissaries were sent to Tripoli, which reveals a truly fragmented Islamic world. Antioch's neighbor knew full well of the month-long struggle, and many were not only unconcerned, but even treated the Latins with great hospitality as they freely traveled the Levant.
Okay, interesting.
The only other significant event throughout April and May involved the captured crusader Renaud Pochet. Yagi Sian wanted to ransom the man and dragged him to the walls to negotiate for his price if he renounced Christianity. Upon the man's refusal, the ruler of Antioch commanded that all of the remaining captives be rounded up, tied in a circle, and burned alive. The screams echoed in the city and crusader camp.
You're just going to piss him off. Why do that?
And
Why
acted
do
as a sign
that?
to both sides that there could be no middle ground.
There is
Despite
no middle
this,
ground now.
Around the end of May, the Crusaders received a message from the garrison, who were ready to surrender. A few representatives were sent into the city, including the Constable of France, Wello, only to be killed once inside. Whether this was a trap or another discovered and prevented plot, this gave a glimpse of a possible key inside the city, one which Bourmont was already working on for months. Back in April, his men made contact with a member of the city guard named Firuz, a Christian who converted to Islam, responsible for one of the southeastern towers on the slopes of the mountain called the Tower of the Two Sisters.
Okay.
The proximity to Tancred's position, his ability to speak Greek, and the distance from the rest of the Crusaders allowed Bourmont to exchange intel via the Armenian merchant caravans, which were selectively granted entry to the city. Without revealing his agent to the rest of the Crusaders, the Norman summoned the council and gave a speech. "Most gallant knights, you see that we are all, both great and small, in dire poverty and misery, and we do not know whence better fortune will come to us. If, therefore, you think it is a good and proper plan, let one of us set himself above the others on the condition that if he can capture the city or engineer its downfall by any means, by himself or by others, he will agree to give it to him."
Okay. Interesting.
Bourmont was a legend within the camp, but the rest of the leaders knew his ambition and refused his offer. There was no point in rushing things. The garrison's morale was failing. The Crusaders were finally well supplied and fed, and from their perspective, it was only a matter of time before they were victorious. But a storm had been brewing in the east for several months, as one ambitious leader was rallying the Muslim world and heading straight to Antioch. Yagi Sian's youngest son, Mohammed, had made it all the way to Baghdad and convinced the Caliph to send a relief force. The man he chose to lead this army was none other than Koboga, Atabeg of Mosul, a Seljuk Turk who had spent the decade chasing down enemies and changing allegiances before securing Harran, Nisibis and Mosul in the name of the Caliph in 1096. The situation in Antioch provided him with the opportunity to truly prove himself, as well as carve out a holding with which to rise to the top of the collapsing Seljuk world. After 6 months of careful planning, he had managed to create a coalition with forces from Damascus, Harran, Horns, Mardin, Samosata and Sinjar. The previous 2 relief forces were just over 10,000 men, but this coalition numbered between 35,000 and 45,000 and was highly motivated. It is easy to draw parallels between an equal number of Christians from across the west to this Muslim force, and as it made its way to the west, rumors began to spread. First, Koboga arrived at Edessa and besieged it for 3 weeks, without any progress, before moving on to Antioch. The Crusaders sent out scouting parties to investigate them, and according to the chronicler, they saw the Muslim army swarming everywhere, from the mountains and different roads, like the sands of the sea, marveling at their infinite thousands, and totally unable to count them.
You'd be shitting yourself.
As the scouts returned on the 28th of May, reporting that the enemy was a few days away, the Crusaders knew that their position was untenable. At this dire moment, Bourmont once again spoke to the council, and this time all except Raymond agreed, but adding the stipulation that, if Bourmont took the city on his own, or with the aid of others, it would be granted to him, but only on the condition that Antioch would be returned to the Emperor if Alexios came to their aid, as their honor was at stake.
Okay.
At that very moment, the identity of Firuz was revealed, and plans were drawn up to assault the city. Due to fear that this scheme would also be discovered by the defenders, as well as to prevent desertion, the council agreed to keep both the plan and the news of the incoming army a secret. Firuz smuggled his son out of the city to act as a hostage, and the exact day and time were decided. The next few days were tense, as the Crusaders sensed that something must be going horribly wrong for the acting chairman of the council, Stefan of Blois, to desert under the pretext of being ill.
He deserted.
Then, on the evening of the 3rd of June, 700 Crusaders departed from the camp in order to fool the defenders of the citadel. At roughly 3 a.m, the men returned to the slopes above the gate of St. George. A sizable contingent was under the command of Godfrey and Robert of Flanders, while the rest followed Bohemond. Everyone held their breath as they whistled at the Tower of Two Sisters before seeing Firouz throw down a thick rope to which they attached a ladder. Not knowing what to expect, the Crusaders were reluctant. Would they be climbing to their death, much like the French constable? Would they end up in flames like the prisoners? Or would they become the ones who broke this long siege? After being encouraged by Bohemond, one by one they started climbing, but burdened by their heavy equipment and rushing to the top, a few of them fell, killing some and injuring others. Everyone braced for disaster, but no watchman appeared on the battlements. 60 men in total, including Bohemond, reached the top of the tower and stealthily killed the guards in the nearby 3 towers, as well as Firouz's brother by mistake. A postern gate was opened, and the remaining 600 Crusaders rushed in. Bohemond sounded his bugle, and while Godfrey and Robert rushed towards the citadel, a small band of men made as much noise as possible as they penetrated the city. Within minutes, the city erupted in chaos, as the besiegers who had threatened them for months were now finally inside. The Normans slashed at anything that moved in the darkness, and as the fear spread, there was no resistance, as everyone fled for their life. Dawn broke, and the blood-red banner of Bohemond could be seen from atop Mount Silpius. The city was taken by less than 1,000 men, so the frightened Christian populace opened the main gates and invited the Crusaders in, begging for their lives to be spared. None were spared that day. Christians, Muslims, men, women, children and elders. The chronicler wrote, "All the streets of the city on every side were full of corpses, so that no one could endure to be there because of the stench, nor could anyone walk along the narrow paths of the city except over the corpses of the dead."
It's the most annoying thing about the Crusades was they were there for so many reasons, and yet they didn't stick to 90% of the reasons, you know? Like, kill Christians, children, mothers, and Muslims. Like, why kill everyone? You had a hatred towards some people, not all the people. Like, it's not justified either way, but it's just
the siege was over,
just stupid.
But the attack on the citadel
no one
failed,
survived,
leaving an isolated pocket of defenders with access to the Iron Gate. As for Yagisiyan, he managed to avoid the slaughter and evacuate from the city, only to be caught by some local Armenians who delivered his head to the Crusaders for a price. However, the Latins soon discovered that the horses in the garrison were unsuited for their style of warfare, and the supplies were dwindling. The very next day, on June 5th, 1098, they looked over the ramparts and saw the army of Koboga. Yet again, utter ruin was avoided, but yet again they had to face an impossible challenge.
Yeah, they now have to siege with
a knight named Rogero
resources.
Banville charged at the host with 15 of his men, only to be lured by a feigned retreat and wiped out. The besiegers now became the besieged, and they tried to fortify the city, while Koboga attacked the only fortification the Crusaders didn't abandon, La Marie. Wave after wave was repelled, but it was too much for the makeshift fort, and it was abandoned and destroyed a few days later. Now both sides were fixated on the citadel. Koboga replaced Yagisiyan's son with one of his own men, showing his true intentions regarding Antioch, and prepared his forces, which could trickle into the city via the Iron Gate, while the Crusaders made camp against it, knowing that they would never be secure if it was in enemy hands. Outnumbered 2-1, the Latins made another audacious attack by charging at the Muslims from a southern postern gate and catching them by surprise. While initially successful, this attack led to many casualties, as the Crusaders either overstayed their welcome by looting the Muslim camp, or were trampled on their way back to the tiny gate. Rather than risking a prolonged siege, where he had to feed 40,000 men, Koboga launched an offensive along the steep slope of the mountain, and his troops poured out of the citadel into Antioch through a single jagged pass. This attack was coordinated with another assault along the south walls. forcing the Crusaders to fight on two fronts.
Okay.
For 2 days, the assault raged on from dawn to dusk, and a Crusader who lived through this terror remarked that a man with food had no time to eat, and a man with water no time to drink. Endless waves of attack.
You imagine fighting for 2 days in a row,
down,
from
only
dawn
for more
to dusk,
appear.
every day?
The cold
Fuck
winter now
that.
seemed like a distant dream, as men collapsed from exhaustion under the summer heat. Many, including well-known knights, began to desert by throwing ropes over the walls. Their number was so great that the rest called them rope dancers. Most of them were rounded up and slain by the Seljuks. In order to prevent the total collapse of the garrison, the leaders swore an oath not to abandon the city and sealed the gates. The unrelenting assault, difficult conditions, and death toll were more severe than anything the Crusaders had to face before. At one point, Beaumont, who was in the thick of the fighting, was surrounded by enemies and was narrowly saved by Robert of Flanders and Robert of Normandy, while elsewhere, an Italian knight, known to us as Mad Hugh, defended a tower single-handedly, breaking 3 spears in the process.
No way! That's
4
sick!
days into the endless onslaught, Beaumont ordered several buildings to be burned down after finding out that some men were hiding there. As one might expect, the fire got out of hand and burned a large chunk of the city. On the night of the 13th to 14th of June, at the brink of the Crusader collapse, a comet was seen in the dark sky. There are too many comets in this sci-fi story, which the clergy used to rally the soldiers one last time. This glimpse of hope gave them the strength to last the night. This comet, alongside the fire burning from within the city, demoralized the Seljuks, who pulled back after one of the bloodiest battles in medieval warfare. Koboga suffered terrible losses, but so did the Crusaders, so the Muslim army spread out and completely surrounded the city. Now all they had to do was wait and watch the Latins die from starvation atop the citadel. Desperate and with no way out, Godfrey lost 200 men in an attempt to raid the Muslim camp outside St. Paul's Gate. Meanwhile, Tancred went on a stealth mission with 10 men and returned with 6 Seljuk heads, and Henri Vesh repelled a whole contingent attempting to climb the walls with ladders with just 2 of his relatives, who gave their life in the process.
No, there was not just 3 of them, there must have been more.
Despite these brave attempts, the situation seemed hopeless as the weeks dragged on.
It would
To
do,
fight
it
off
would
hunger,
do.
the Crusaders boiled the skins of horses, camels, donkeys, and woodland plants as their numbers continued to decline. But then on June 10th, a peasant from Provence named Peter Bartholomew confessed that he had been having visions, telling him that the spear that pierced Jesus during his crucifixion was now buried under the Basilica of St. Peter. Many, including Bishop Adhemar, were skeptical about this tale, since they saw the Holy Lance in the vault of Constantinople during their journey. But others, like Raymond, believed Peter and commissioned 12 men who began the excavation. Despite digging for an entire day, they found nothing until Peter jumped in the hole barefooted and began to pray. Then suddenly a small shard of metal was found, and the entire host rejoiced.
What a smart way to get the morale of your men back up.
Difficult to imagine or describe the profound effect that this relic had on the army, but even modern scholars agree that this shard had a profound impact on Crusader morale.
Yep.
Later that year, the Latins would write to the Pope, "We were so comforted and strengthened by the lance's discovery, and by so many other divine revelations, that some of us who had been discouraged and fearful beforehand then became courageous and resolute to fight and encouraged each other." The next 2 weeks were uneventful, as the starving but uplifted Crusaders hoped to be reinforced. Peter the Hermit was sent to negotiate with Koboga and offered a group trial by combat, where 5, 10, 20 or 100 men on each side would fight to prevent mass casualties. But the Atabeg simply laughed in his face and demanded that they surrender and convert to Islam if they wanted to live. The Latins were trapped and decided to pursue an extremely aggressive and bold strategy. They would forfeit their defensive positions in order to sally out and attack the enemy head-on. Beaumont was elected as commander-in-chief of the entire army.
Interesting.
The men fasted for 3 days, shared bread and wine, and marched out of the city on the first light of June 28, 1098. Bohemond divided his now nearly entirely infantry-based army of 20,000, including some non-combatants, into 4 equal contingents: the northern French under the two Roberts, Lotharingians and Germans commanded by Godfrey, and the southern French led by Adhemar. Bohemond himself, as always, held the reserve, made up of southern Italians, and Raymond, who was ill, was left with 200 men to guard the city against the citadel.
Okay.
Heralds were deployed to ensure the cohesion of each of the 4 groups, and Hugh of Vermandois led a squadron of archers which beat back the first line of Muslims. Under the cover of Frankish arrows, each division was allowed to cross the river onto the plain and join in formation. The Muslim force was far larger, but spread out in order to maintain the blockade, and it took some time for Koboga to receive the news of the audacious movements, since his camp was 5 kilometers to the north.
Okay.
Writing many years later, the Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir explained events by claiming that the following discussion between Koboga and his advisors happened. The Muslims said to Koboga, "You should go up to the city and kill them one by one as they come out. It's easy to pick them off now that they have split up." He replied, "Wait until they have all come out, and then we will kill them." Koboga knew that if he ordered a quick response, the Crusaders would most likely retreat back into the walls after a brief skirmish, and what he wanted was a decisive victory.
Okay.
But rather than taking his time, taking the city, or using his mounted archers to harass the sluggish and hungry Crusaders, he then ordered a rushed, disorganized advance. Meanwhile, the Latins were busy fighting off an enemy from the south, which rushed in from the back. But the rearguard fought with such ferocity, despite taking heavy casualties, that the enemy was repelled and forced to flee, disconnected from the rest of the Seljuk host.
Okay.
Numerous tents were scattered around the siege line,
Boys are doing
preventing
well.
the Seljuks from fully committing to their steppe tactics, especially since their commander was missing. It is important to remember that, unlike the Crusaders, their coalition only had one leader, who was now smashing against his own routed troops. He tried to rally his men and charged against the riderless knights, but the line of heavy infantry held. At close quarters, the Muslims were no match for the Westerners, and it didn't take long for them to turn and flee. One Muslim chronicler reports, "The Franks, though they were in the extremity of weakness, advanced in battle order against the armies of Islam, which were at the height of their strength and numbers, and they broke the ranks of the Muslims and scattered their multitudes."
Wow.
The camp was overrun and ravaged, the citadel surrendered, and the Muslim coalition was defeated. Every leader stuck to Bohemond's plan and capitalized on the morale from the Holy Lance as well as the desperation. The Crusaders seemed to have been worlds away from home, and yet again they were victorious against all odds. The road to Jerusalem was open. Our series on the First Crusade will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure to subscribe and...
A good episode. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to finding out what we've got in the next episode. If you haven't already, head over to Kings&Genrals page. The link's going to be in the description box down below. If you guys enjoyed my reaction, looking forward to future reactions, then like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will catch you in the next video.